My ex-husband's new wife accused me of financial abuse because I refused to fund her children's lifestyle. I am 35 with a 14-year-old son, Leo, and an 11-year-old daughter, Mia. My ex, David, and I divorced 5 years ago. The marriage ended the day I found email receipts proving he had been taking romantic trips with a real estate agent who originally sold us our house. They got married barely 9 months after the ink dried on our divorce papers. We technically have a joint custody agreement, but in practice, it is entirely one-sided. David is supposed to take Leo and Mia every other weekend. In reality, he bails on them constantly. It is always a weak excuse. His car is making a weird noise. He has a massive migraine. But usually, it is because his new stepson has a weekend travel baseball tournament in another state. The real conflict started on March 12th. I had been saving up for over a year to surprise Leo with something huge. He is obsessed with aviation, so I paid $2,450 to enroll him in an elite 2-week summer flight academy in Pensacola, Florida. When I gave Leo the acceptance packet, he practically cried. He was so proud that he took a picture of the brochure and posted it on his Instagram story. The next morning at exactly 8:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a massive text from David. He did not say congratulations to his son. Instead, he said that if I had nearly $3,000 to throw away on a summer camp, I needed to wire him $1,200 to cover his 12-year-old stepson's private math tutor. He claimed his stepson saw Leo's post and had a complete meltdown about things being unfair, and that David's household budget was currently drowning because of inflation. I replied with one sentence: I do not fund the lives of children I did not give birth to. 10 minutes later, his new wife sent me a scathing email. She accused me of financial abuse, claiming I was creating a toxic wealth disparity between the kids. She said a real mother would want all the children in the extended family to thrive equally. I did not even reply. I just created an email filter that sends her name directly to the trash folder. Things exploded in late April during Mia's regional debate tournament in downtown Seattle. David had sworn for 3 straight months that he would be there. He promised Mia he would take her out for a celebratory dinner afterward. The tournament started at 9 a.m. By 2 p.m., she had made it to the finals. David was nowhere to be found. When the judges announced Mia had won first place in her division, the organizers asked the parents to come to the stage for a photo op. I walked up, but my father, who had flown in all the way from Boise just for this, stepped up right beside me. He threw his arm around Mia, beaming with pride. David finally burst through the auditorium doors an hour after the event ended. He was wearing a baseball team jacket, sweating, rambling about a massive traffic jam on the interstate. Mia just stared at him with zero emotion. "It is fine," she said, her voice completely flat. "Grandpa stood on stage with me. He is the one who actually shows up to my stuff anyway." David stopped breathing. He looked over at my dad, then back at Mia, his face draining of all color. I just handed Mia her trophy and told her to go wait by the car. Instead of an angry text from his mother, the real fallout happened a week later because of a massive legal crisis. His wife's ex-husband suddenly filed an emergency motion for full physical custody of her kids, citing emotional neglect in David's household. David's lawyer panicked. He told David the only way to save his new marriage was to get sworn character affidavits from Leo and Mia, testifying to the judge that David was an incredibly devoted, present, and loving father who provided a perfectly stable home. David drove to my house unannounced on a Tuesday evening. He sat at my dining room table, practically shaking, and slid 2 blank legal documents toward my kids. He begged them to write down how much they loved their weekends with him, how he always put them first. Leo looked at the paper, then at the pen David was holding out like a peace offering. My son didn't even reach for it. He just leaned back in the chair I bought with my last bonus check and crossed his arms. He asked his dad how he was supposed to write about weekends that didn't happen. David started talking fast, his voice cracking. He said that omissions for the sake of family unity weren't lies. He told Leo that if he didn't sign this, his step-siblings would be taken away, and his new wife, Sarah, would never forgive any of us. He actually tried to make it sound like Leo's fault for being too fortunate with the flight camp. I stood by the kitchen island, hands gripped tight around a mug of cold coffee. I told David that if he didn't leave in the next 30 seconds, I was calling the police for trespassing. He looked at me with this desperate, frantic expression I hadn't seen since the day I found those emails 5 years ago. He knew I had him. He grabbed the papers off the table, nearly knocking over a vase of flowers, and stumbled out the front door. 2 days later, the real pressure started. It wasn't from David, it was from his parents. My former in-laws, who usually stay out of the drama, started calling my personal cell and my work line. His mother, Brenda, left a 3-minute voicemail sobbing. She said that David's house was in a total state of collapse. Apparently, Sarah was blaming David for her ex-husband's sudden legal move, saying that David's poor relationship with his biological kids made her look bad in court. Brenda begged me to let the kids sign a toned-down version of the affidavit. She said she'd pay for Mia's private school tuition next year if I just made this go away. I didn't call her back. I forwarded the voicemail to my own lawyer. On Friday, I got a delivery at work. It wasn't flowers. It was a formal legal notice from David's attorney. He wasn't suing me, not yet, but he was requesting a mandatory mediation to discuss a modification of the custody agreement. David wanted to change our joint custody to a strict, court-mandated 50/50 split, not because he wanted to see Leo and Mia more, but because he needed to prove to Sarah's ex-husband's lawyers that he was a high-capacity father. He needed the kids in his house half the time to use them as props in someone else's custody battle. When I told Leo and Mia about the mediation, Leo's face went hard. He's 14. He sees everything now. He told me he wasn't going. He said he had flight simulator practice, and he wasn't missing it to sit in a room and listen to his dad lie. Mia just went quiet, which was worse. She started carrying her debate trophy from room to room like it was a shield. The mediation was set for a rainy Tuesday in a bland office building in Bellevue. I showed up with my lawyer, a woman named Diane who has the temperament of a surgical blade. David was already there, sitting next to Sarah. This was the first time I had been in a room with her in over a year. She looked exhausted, but the second she saw me, her eyes sharpened. She didn't look like a woman losing her kids. She looked like a woman who had decided I was the reason for all her problems. We hadn't even sat down before Sarah started. She didn't wait for the mediator. She looked at me and said that my hoarding of resources was what triggered her ex-husband's motion. She claimed that by paying for the flight academy and not contributing to her son's tutoring, I had created a documented environment of inequality that made her household look unstable. She called it a calculated move to ruin her marriage. Diane, my lawyer, didn't even look up from her tablet. She just said, "My client is under no legal or moral moral obligation to subsidize the children of a woman who helped dismantle her marriage. David looked like he wanted to crawl under the mahogany table. He kept trying to reach for Sarah's hand, but she kept pulling it away. The mediator, a man who looked like he had seen 1,000 versions of this exact disaster, cleared his throat and asked David why he was suddenly seeking a 50-over-50 split when he currently failed to meet even 20% of his scheduled time. David's excuse was pathetic. He said his professional life had stabilized, and he was now prioritizing his legacy. Your legacy? I asked. I couldn't help it. You missed your daughter's championship for a middle school baseball game that wasn't even your son's. You didn't even call her. The room went silent. Sarah leaned forward, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. She told me that if I didn't agree to the 50-over-50 split and sign the character affidavits, she would make sure every parent in our school district knew I was a financial bully who weaponized child support. She said she had already drafted a post for the local community group. I looked at David. I wanted to see if there was any part of the man I used to love left in there. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a coffee stain on his notebook. The mediation is over, Diane said, standing up. We'll see you in front of a judge. And David, if you or your wife contact my client's children directly about these affidavits again, we're filing for a restraining order. We walked out, but the air felt heavy. I knew this wasn't the end. Sarah is the kind of person who would burn her own house down just to make sure you inhaled the smoke. That night, my phone started blowing up. It wasn't David. It was the wealth disparity Sarah had mentioned. Someone had leaked the cost of Leo's flight academy to a group chat of soccer moms, and suddenly, my inbox was full of concerned messages, asking why I wasn't being more collaborative with the new family dynamic. Then, the doorbell rang at 9 p.m. I looked through the peephole. It was Sarah's ex-husband, a man I had only met once at a brief school function years ago. He looked terrified. He wasn't there to fight. He held up a manila envelope and whispered through the door that I needed to see what David and Sarah were planning to do with my kids' college funds. I opened the door. He didn't come in, but he handed me the envelope. Inside were printouts of bank transfers. David hadn't just been skipping weekends. Over the last 6 months, he had been systematically draining the small UTMA accounts his parents had set up for Leo and Mia's college. He was using the money to pay for Sarah's legal fees and her son's travel baseball fees. The accounts were in David's name as the custodian, so it was technically legal, but it was a total betrayal. He was robbing his own children to pay for the woman who helped him cheat. I sat on the floor of my entryway, the papers spread out around me. The financial abuse Sarah had accused me of was a projection. They were the ones bleeding my kids dry. I looked up and saw Leo standing at the top of the stairs. He had heard everything. He didn't say a word. He just walked back into his room and shut the door. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I drove straight to the bank. I needed to see exactly how much was left. While I was sitting in the lobby, waiting for a manager, I got a notification on my phone. Sarah had made the post. It was a long, rambling essay about the hidden face of financial coercion, and it had my name in the first paragraph. She had included a cropped photo of the Flight Academy brochure. People were already commenting. So sad when mothers use money to hurt the father's new family, one wrote. Another said, wealth shouldn't be used as a weapon. I felt sick. But then, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of a message David had sent to Sarah's ex-husband an hour ago. In it, David was bragging that once he got the 50-over-50 custody, he would be able to petition the court to stop paying me child support entirely, and instead, force me to pay times him times because of my higher disposable income. He wasn't fighting for his kids. He was fighting for a paycheck to stay in Sarah's good graces. I was still at the bank when David's mother called again. This time, I answered. I didn't give her a chance to cry. I told her that David had emptied the college accounts. There was a long, horrible silence on the other end. Brenda loved those kids, even if she was a letdown as a grandmother sometimes. She said she didn't believe me. I told her I'd email her the bank statements I was holding in my hand. 5 minutes later, she called back. She wasn't crying anymore. She sounded cold. She told me she was going to talk to her husband, and they would be at my house in an hour. When they arrived, they weren't alone. They had brought David's younger brother, who is a CPA. We sat in my living room, and for 3 hours, we went through every cent David had touched. It was worse than I thought. He hadn't just taken the college money. He had taken out a personal loan in his father's name using a forged signature to cover a down payment on a new SUV Sarah wanted. He's drowning, his brother said, rubbing his temples. He's trying to buy her love because he knows the second the money runs out, she's going back to her ex. Just as we were finishing the tally, a car screeched into my driveway. It was David. He must have seen his parents' car. He came through the front door without knocking, his face purple with rage. He saw the bank statements on the coffee table and froze. What are you doing? He screamed at me. This is a private family matter. It stopped being private when you stole from your children, David, his father said, standing up. I had never seen David's father angry. He was a quiet, retired librarian, but right then, he looked like he was ready to disown his eldest son. David looked at me, then at the papers, then at his parents. He didn't apologize. He didn't even try to explain. He looked at me and said, if you hadn't bought that stupid flight camp, I wouldn't have had to do any of this. You pushed me into a corner. He actually believed it. In his mind, my success and my ability to provide for our children was a direct assault on him. Get out, his father said. You can't kick me out of her house, David spat. I'm not kicking you out of her house, his father replied. I'm telling you that if you don't return every cent to those accounts by Monday, I am going to the police about that loan application. David's jaw dropped. He looked like he was about to collapse. He turned and ran out the door. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought the threat of jail would make him stop. But 2 hours later, I got a call from the Flight Academy in Pensacola. A woman had called them claiming to be me, saying there had been a family emergency and requesting a full refund of Leo's tuition. They had already processed the cancellation. The money was gone. And Leo's spot in the academy, the one he had worked 2 years for, had been instantly filled by the next kid on the waiting list. I stood in my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air after the admissions director hung up. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely press the button to end the call. I called back immediately. I didn't care that it was Saturday. I demanded to know exactly how a refund of nearly $3,000 was authorized without my physical signature. The director sounded annoyed, then defensive, and finally, nervous. She pulled up the file. She told me that a woman had called, verified my date of birth, my billing zip code, and the last 4 digits of my social security number. All information Sarah had access to through David's copy of our old tax returns and divorce decree. The caller had claimed my credit card had been compromised in a fraud scan. She requested the refund be issued issued via an expedited cashier's check and mailed to my new permanent address, David's address. They had stolen my identity to steal my son's money. The director apologized profusely, her voice shaking now, but she said the check had already been overnighted via FedEx. The spot was gone. The money was in transit. There was nothing the academy could do from their end. I put the phone down on the granite counter. The house was completely silent. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock above the stove. I looked up at the ceiling. Leo's room was right above the kitchen. I could hear his chair squeak as he shifted at his desk. He was probably up there looking at flight simulator videos, planning what he would say to the instructors in Pensacola. I have faced some terrible moments in my life. Finding those hotel receipts on David's iPad was a sharp, suffocating pain. Sitting across from him in mediation while he lied to a stranger's face was infuriating. But walking up those stairs to tell my 14-year-old son that his father and his stepmother had essentially robbed him of his dream was the hardest physical movement I have ever made. My legs felt like they were made of wet concrete. I knocked on his door. He called out for me to come in. He was sitting at his computer. He had a notebook open, and he was writing down different runway approach codes. He looked over his shoulder, smiling. It was the kind of unguarded, purely happy smile I hadn't seen on him since before the divorce. I sat down on the edge of his bed. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't say there was a mix-up or a mistake. I treated him like the young man he was being forced to become. I told him exactly what Sarah did. I told him the spot was gone. Leo stopped writing. He didn't drop the pen. He just set it down precisely on the line of the notebook paper. He turned his chair around to face me. He didn't cry. I wished he had cried. Instead, his face went completely blank. His eyes darkened, hardening into something cold and remote. "She called them," he said. His voice didn't crack, and canceled it. "Yes, and Dad let her. The check is going to their house, Leo. I'm so sorry. I am going to fix this. I am going to get the money back, and we will find another camp. Maybe not this summer, but—" "Don't!" he interrupted. He stood up. He walked over to his closet and pulled out a black plastic trash bag. "Leo, what are you doing?" "I don't want to talk about it," he said. He walked over to the bulletin board above his desk. He started unpinning the brochures, the printed photos of the Pensacola airfield, the schedule I had printed out for him. He dropped them into the trash bag. "You don't have to throw those away," I said, my throat burning. "Please, honey, we'll get you there. I promise you." He turned to look at me, holding a glossy photo of a Cessna. "Mom, stop. Just stop. He won. They won. Please leave my room." I had to walk out. I closed his door, went into my own bedroom, locked it, and sat on the floor of my closet. I cried until I couldn't breathe. I cried for the little boy who used to wait by the window for his dad's car to pull up. I cried for the teenager who just realized his father would sell him out for a fraction of a used SUV payment. 10 minutes later, I splashed cold water on my face. I picked up my phone and called Diane. It went to voicemail. I texted her. Sarah impersonated me, canceled Leo's camp, and had the $2,450 refund overnighted to their house. I have the academy director willing to testify. Diane called me back in less than 60 seconds. I could hear the sound of a grocery store in the background, but her tone was pure ice. "Do not text David," she said. "Do not call Sarah. Do not go to their house. I want the money back, Diane." "You aren't just getting the money back," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "You are going to the police station, right now. You are going to file a report for identity theft, wire fraud, and grand theft. Taking the college funds was technically a civil matter because his name was on the UTMA accounts. This is not. This is a felony. Go to the precinct, get a badge number and a case number, and text them to me before you go to sleep." I grabbed my keys. I told Mia, who was watching TV in the living room, that I had to run an errand and to stay with her brother. The police station in our district is a squat, brutalist brick building. The lobby smelled like industrial floor cleaner and stale coffee. I waited 45 minutes before a desk sergeant called me up. I handed him my ID and told him I needed to report a felony identity theft. He looked tired. He pointed me toward a small glass-walled room down the hall. 10 minutes later, a detective named Miller walked in. He had a notepad and a pen that looked like it had been chewed on. He sat down and asked me to walk him through it. I could tell he was initially dismissing it as a messy domestic dispute. The moment I said the words ex-husband and new wife, his eyes glazed over slightly. He probably dealt with petty exes fighting over flat-screen TVs all day long. "Ma'am," he said, holding up a hand when I explained the camp cancellation. "It sounds like a civil issue. Family court. You might want to take this up in mediation." "I was in mediation on Tuesday," I said, my voice perfectly level. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. "My ex-husband is currently petitioning for 50/50 custody to lower his child support. Yesterday, we discovered he drained $18,000 from our children's college funds. Today, his wife called a business across state lines, provided my social security number without my authorization, posed as me, and diverted a $2,450 refund to her own address." I slid the printed email from the academy director, which I had asked her to send me right after our call, across the table. I slid a copy of my divorce decree, showing my social security number. Next to it, "She crossed state lines via telecommunications to commit fraud," I said. "She stole $2,500. In this state, anything over $750 is a felony. I am not leaving until a report is filed and a case number is generated." Detective Miller looked at the papers. He read the email. He looked up at me, the tiredness in his eyes suddenly replaced by a sharp, focused attention. He realized I wasn't a hysterical ex-wife. I was a woman building a cage. "I'll need the contact information for the academy director," he said, pulling his notepad closer. I spent 2 hours in that room. I gave them everything. The phone numbers, the addresses, the timeline. When I walked out of the precinct, the sun was going down. I had a small white card in my purse with a case number written on it in blue ink. Sunday was a ghost town in our house. Leo didn't come out of his room except to eat. Mia was incredibly quiet. She knew something massive had shifted, but she didn't ask questions. She just sat next to me on the couch while I stared blankly at a muted television, resting her head on my shoulder. Monday morning brought a new kind of hell. I dropped the kids off at their respective schools. As I pulled into the parking lot of Mia's middle school, I noticed a group of mothers standing near the drop-off gate. These were the women from the local community Facebook group, the ones who had read Sarah's post about my financial coercion. As I walked Mia toward the gate, the conversation among the women abruptly stopped. 3 of them turned to look at me. It wasn't the usual passive-aggressive suburban glare. glance. It was a synchronized, hostile stare. One of them, a woman named Chloe, who always volunteered for the bake sales and drove a pristine white Range Rover, stepped forward. She actually blocked the sidewalk. "Morning," she said. The word was a weapon. "Excuse me, Chloe. Mia needs to get to homeroom." "We saw Sarah's post," Chloe said, crossing her arms over her expensive yoga jacket. "You know, some of us think it's pretty disgusting to use your paycheck to alienate a father from his kids. They're a blended family now. You need to learn to share." Mia tensed beside me. She gripped the strap of her backpack. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break eye contact. I stepped exactly 1 inch closer to Chloe. "Sarah's husband drained $18,000 from his own children's college accounts to pay for her son's baseball tournaments," I said clearly. The two mothers standing behind Chloe gasped. "On Saturday, Sarah committed felony identity theft to steal my son's summer camp tuition. There is an active police investigation. If you want to share that with the Facebook group, feel free. Now move out of my daughter's way." Chloe's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She stepped aside. I walked Mia through the gates. When I turned back, the three women were huddled together, frantically typing on their phones. The narrative was breaking. I got to work by 9. At 10:15 a.m., my office phone rang. It was the receptionist down in the lobby. "There's a man here to see you," she said, sounding uncertain. "He says it's an emergency." "David?" My blood went cold. He came to my office. He had never come to my office in the 5 years we had been divorced. "Tell him I am in a meeting and he needs to leave the premises immediately," I said. He's highly agitated," she whispered. "He says if you don't come down, he's coming up. Call building security," I said, hanging up. I walked out of my office and stood by the glass doors of our suite. 5 minutes later, the elevator dinged. 2 security guards stepped out, flanked by David. He looked completely unhinged. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing the same baseball jacket he had worn to the debate tournament. His hair was a mess, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He saw me through the glass and lunged forward, but one of the guards put a heavy hand on his chest. "You called the cops?" David screamed through the glass. People in the bullpen behind me started standing up from their desks. "Are you insane? The police showed up at my house at 8 in the morning." I pushed the glass door open just enough to speak to the guards. "I want him removed from the building. He is not authorized to be here. I'll have you arrested for filing a false report," David yelled, his voice echoing in the marble hallway. "It was our money. We are legally entitled to it. You owed us that money for the tutoring. You're admitting to it," I said quietly, staring right at him. "She just wanted to balance the scales," he pleaded, his anger suddenly collapsing into absolute desperation. "You don't understand. The FedEx guy came and they took the check for evidence." Sarah was crying. "Her ex is going to use this. He's going to take her kids away. You have to call the detective and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please." He was begging me to save the woman who had ruined my marriage and robbed my son. "Security," I said, stepping back inside. "If he comes back, call the real police." The doors clicked shut and locked automatically. I watched them escort him back into the elevator. He looked broken, pathetic, and small. I didn't feel an ounce of pity. I went back to my desk and called Diane. I updated her on the office ambush. She immediately drafted a formal cease and desist letter to be sent to both his home and his place of work, explicitly barring him from approaching my home, my office, or my children's schools. "He's panicking," Diane said. "The police intercepting that FedEx check means they have physical evidence of mail fraud on top of the wire fraud. He knows Sarah is looking at real charges. Expect them to do something erratic." I didn't have to wait long. At 1:45 p.m., my cell phone rang. It was the principal from Mia's middle school. "Mrs. Davis," the principal said, her voice tight. "I need you to come to the school immediately." "Is Mia okay? Is she hurt?" I was already grabbing my coat. "Mia is safe in my office," the principal assured me quickly. "But there is a situation in the front lobby. Your ex-husband's wife is here. She is demanding to sign Mia out of school." I stopped dead in the hallway. "What?" "She told the front desk there was a family medical emergency, and she needed to take Mia to the hospital," the principal explained. The secretary almost let her through, but Mia's homeroom teacher happened to be walking by and recognized her from the debate tournament. She knew Mia wasn't supposed to go with her stepmother. When we questioned her, she became incredibly combative. "Lock the doors," I said, sprinting for the elevator. "Do not let her near my daughter. I am calling the police on my way." "We've already called them," the principal said. "She refuses to leave the lobby." I drove the 4 miles to the school in under 7 minutes. When I pulled into the circular driveway, I saw a black and white police cruiser parked by the front steps. Its lights were flashing lazily in the afternoon sun. I threw my car into park and ran toward the double glass doors. Inside, the lobby was a scene of controlled chaos. Sarah was standing near the reception desk. She looked completely different from the polished, sneering woman at the mediation table. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was erratic, and she was gripping the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles were white. 2 police officers were standing between her and the doors leading to the classrooms. "I am her stepmother," Sarah was shrieking at the officers. "I have a legal right to pick her up. Her father gave me permission. You are violating my rights." "Ma'am, the school has confirmed you are not on the approved pickup list," one of the officers said calmly, resting his hand casually near his belt. "We need you to step outside the building." I burst through the doors. Sarah whipped her head around. The moment she saw me, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She didn't look like a mother trying to pick up a child. She looked like an animal caught in a trap, willing to chew her own leg off if it meant she could bite me first. "You!" she screamed, lunging toward me. The officer moved instantly, stepping into her path and putting up a stiff arm, catching her firmly by the shoulder. "Ma'am, back up, right now." "You did this," Sarah yelled, struggling against the officer's grip, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You sent the police to my house. You terrified my children. My ex is filing an emergency ex parte order because of your lies." "They weren't lies," I said, my voice eerily calm. The contrast between her hysteria and my stillness seemed to make her even crazier. "You stole from my son." "It was our money," she screeched, tears of rage spilling down her face. "David pays you thousands of dollars. We needed it. You are a selfish, greedy bitch who is trying to destroy my family. You're doing a fine job of that yourself," I said. I looked at the officers. "I am the biological mother. I have primary custody. She has absolutely no legal right to my daughter. Furthermore, she is currently under investigation by Detective Miller at the 4th Precinct for felony identity theft against me. I want her removed." Quote, the second officer pulled out his radio. The first officer, who still had a hand on Sarah's arm, told her she was being detained for causing a disturbance on school grounds. "You can't do this," she sobbed as they turned her around. "David," she screamed, as if he were hiding in the hallways. "David, do something." But David wasn't there. He was probably sitting in his car somewhere, too cowardly to face the wreckage he had enabled. I watched watched them walk her out the front doors. She was still screaming obscenities about me, about the money, about how unfair it all was. I stood in the lobby until the cruiser doors slammed shut. The principal came out of her office, looking pale. Mia was standing right behind her. She had her backpack on. She looked at the front doors, then at me. "Mom?" she whispered. I walked over and knelt down, pulling her into a tight hug. She buried her face in my neck, and I felt her small body trembling. "I've got you," I told her, kissing the top of her head. "I've got you. We're going home." I signed her out for the rest of the day. As we walked to the car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it until we were buckled in, and the doors were locked. I pulled it out. It was a text from David's brother, the CPA. "I just left my parents' house." The message read, "Dad went to the bank. He paid back the $18,000 into the kids' accounts from his own retirement savings. He told David he is dead to him, but you need to know something else. While we were auditing David's accounts, we found another loan. It's not in his name, or Dad's." I stared at the screen, my stomach dropping. "What do you mean?" I typed back. 3 dots appeared. Then the reply. "There's a $25,000 personal line of credit opened 3 months ago. It's tied to an email address David controls, but the name on the application is Leo Davis." I felt all the oxygen leave the car. He hadn't just drained their past, he was leveraging their future. My 14-year-old son, who couldn't even drive yet, was $25,000 in debt to a predatory lending company because his father had stolen his identity too. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared at the phone screen until the display went dark. Mia was in the passenger seat, kicking her sneakers against the floor mat, humming a song she'd learned in choir. She had no idea that the man who gave her half her DNA was actively destroying her brother's life. I put the car in drive. I drove exactly the speed limit all the way back to our house. I pulled into the garage, shut the door, and told Mia to go wash her face and pick out a movie. She ran upstairs, glad to be away from the chaos of the school lobby. I stayed in the kitchen. I leaned against the counter and called Diane. I didn't even wait for her to say hello. "He took out a loan in Leo's name," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. $25,000. His brother just found it during the audit. Diane was silent for 4 full seconds. In lawyer time, that's an eternity. "Send me the screenshot of the text," she finally said. Her voice had lost all its usual sharpness. It was just grim. "Right now." I sent it. I heard her keyboard clacking furiously in the background. "Okay," Diane said. "Listen to me carefully. You need to go online right now and pull credit reports for both of your children. Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, all 3. You need to freeze their credit immediately. Then, you are going to call Detective Miller at the precinct and add this to the active file. This isn't just family court anymore. This is felony fraud. He crossed a line he can't walk back from. He's 14, I whispered, the absurdity of it finally catching up to me. How did he even get approved? Predatory online lenders, Diane said, disgust dripping from every syllable. They don't verify IDs properly. They run a social security number, see a blank slate with no bad history, and issue a line of credit. If David forged the birth year on the application, the algorithm wouldn't care. We see it all the time with desperate parents. I hung up and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking so badly I mistyped my own email address twice. It took 45 minutes to navigate the labyrinth of the credit bureaus. You aren't supposed to have to pull a credit report for a child. When I finally got through the verification steps, the PDF loaded on my screen. There it was, an unsecured personal line of credit from an online lender called Apex Financial, opened 90 days ago. Limit, $25,000. Current balance, $24,850. He had maxed it out in 3 months. I scrolled down to the payment history. He had made 2 minimum payments of $400 just to keep it from going into default. The interest rate was 28%. My son was racking up hundreds of dollars in interest every month on money he never saw. I froze the credit. I did the same for Mia, holding my breath the entire time. Hers was clean. He hadn't gotten to her yet. Or maybe he just figured one ruined child was enough. I printed the report. The paper felt heavy in my hand. I walked upstairs to Leo's room. He was lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The trash bag with his flight camp brochures was still sitting in the corner, tied shut. "Leo," I said. He didn't look at me. "What?" I sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't know how to soften this. There is no soft way to tell a teenager that his father has stolen his future. "I need your phone," I said. He frowned, finally looking at me. "Why?" "Because if he tries to text you or call you, I don't want you to see it. I'm turning it off." "Mom, what's going on? You're freaking me out." I put the paper on his chest. He picked it up, squinting at the dense columns of numbers and text. He was smart, but he was a kid. He didn't know how to read a credit report. "Dad took out a loan," I said, "using your social security number." Leo stared at me. "I don't have a job. How can I have a loan?" "He lied," I said. "He pretended to be you. He borrowed $25,000 and the bank thinks you owe it to them." I watched his brain try to process it. The betrayal of the flight camp had been a sharp, sudden blow. This was different. This was a slow, crushing weight. He looked back at the paper. He saw the number. $24,850. He read aloud. His voice was a flat monotone. "That's how much he took. We are going to fix it," I said, leaning in, trying to catch his eye. "I am freezing your credit. Diane is on it. The police are on it. You will not pay a single cent of this. I promise you." "What did he buy?" Leo asked. "I don't know yet." "Was it the car? For Sarah?" "I don't know, honey." Leo let the paper drop to the floor. He rolled over so his back was to me. He pulled the blanket up to his shoulders. "Take the phone," he said to the wall. "I don't want to talk to him ever again." I took his phone from the nightstand. I powered it down. I wanted to hug him, to pull him up and tell him it would be okay, but I knew he couldn't handle being touched right now. He was completely hollowed out. I went downstairs and called Detective Miller. He remembered me immediately. When I told him about the Apex Financial loan, he let out a long, heavy sigh. "I need that credit report," Miller said, "and I need you to put me in touch with the brother, the CPA. If he did an audit and found this, he's a material witness." "I'll text you his number," I said. "Mrs. Davis," Miller said, his voice dropping into a serious official register. "Given the incident at the school today with the wife, and now this, I'm expediting the warrants. We're going to pull the IP addresses for the loan application, but you need to be prepared. This is going to get incredibly messy. Once the lending company realizes they've been defrauded, their own fraud department is going to get involved. It's going to be a bureaucratic nightmare to clear your son's name." "I don't care how long it takes," I said. "I just want David held accountable." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room chair with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago, watching the street through the blinds. Every time a car drove past, my heart spiked. I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and pure, unadulterated anger. At 6 a.m. on Tuesday, my phone vibrated on the coffee table. It was an email, not a text. The sender was David's work address. I know what you're doing. You talked to my brother. You need to call the police and tell them it was a misunderstanding. I took that loan out to protect Leo's assets in a high-yield account. It was an investment strategy. If you let this go to court, my company will fire me. I won't be able to pay child support. You'll be ruining your own kids' lives. He was still lying. Even with the paper trail perfectly illuminated, he was trying to spin it as a financial strategy. He was completely delusional. He actually believed that threatening my child support was leverage. I forwarded the email to Diane. I didn't reply. By Wednesday morning, the local fallout started hitting. The police investigation wasn't a secret anymore. Detective Miller had formally requested records from David's bank, which meant the bank's fraud department had frozen David and Sarah's joint checking accounts pending the investigation. I found this out because at 10:30 a.m., Sarah's ex-husband called me. I don't know what you did, he said, sounding entirely overwhelmed, but Sarah just called me screaming. All their cards are declining. The grocery store, the gas station. She said the bank told her there's a hold from the fraud division. David committed identity theft against my son. I told him plainly, and Sarah impersonated me to steal a refund check. The police are freezing their assets to track the stolen funds. He went dead silent on the line. Oh my God. You need to get your kids out of there, I told him. Whatever custody motion you filed, expedite it, because that house is about to implode. I have a hearing on Friday, he said quickly. The judge granted an emergency review because of the school incident yesterday. My lawyer is using the police report. Good. She blames you, he warned me, his voice dropping. She told me you set them up. She said you manipulated David into taking the money so you could trap them. Let her think whatever she wants, I said. She doesn't have a dime left to fight it. I hung up, feeling a strange, cold sense of satisfaction. The wealth disparity Sarah had whined about was finally real. They were broke, frozen out of their own accounts, drowning in stolen debt. But the satisfaction didn't last. At 2 p.m., I received a calendar notification on my phone. It was an alert from the shared co-parenting app David and I were court-ordered to use. David has scheduled a pickup. Friday, 4 p.m. Weekend visitation. I stared at the notification. He had canceled his weekends for the last 2 months straight. Now, with his accounts frozen, the police investigating him, and his marriage collapsing, he was suddenly demanding his court-ordered time with the children he had robbed. He didn't want to see them. He wanted to use them. He wanted to force them into his house so he could pressure Leo into signing some kind of document absolving him, or maybe just to punish me by taking them away for 48 hours into a totally unstable environment. I called Diane immediately. I am not sending them, I said before she even had a chance to say hello. He just requested his weekend. I don't care if I get held in contempt. They are not getting in a car with him. You won't be held in contempt, Diane said sharply. I've already filed an ex parte motion to suspend his visitation rights based on the police investigation and the financial abuse, but the judge hasn't signed it yet. The docket is backed up. So what do I do? You deny the request in the app, she said. State clearly. Visitation denied due to active police investigation regarding financial fraud against the minor children. Make him call the cops to enforce his custody time. I promise you. With Miller's active case file, no officer is going to force those kids into his car. I opened the app. My fingers were stiff. I typed out exactly what Diane said and hit send. 10 minutes later, the app pinged again. David, you are violating the court order. I will be at the house at 4 p.m. on Friday. If the kids are not ready, I am calling the police for parental alienation. He was weaponizing the system he was actively defrauding. He thought if he played the victim of a bitter ex-wife withholding custody, the courts would ignore the $25,000 missing in his son's name. Thursday was agonizing. Every hour felt like a slow crawl toward the impending confrontation. Leo was staying in his room, doing his homework in complete silence. He hadn't mentioned the loan again, but I could see the weight of it in the way he held his shoulders. He looked exhausted. At dinner time, I ordered a pizza. We sat at the kitchen island, eating off paper plates. Mia was talking about a science project, trying desperately to fill the heavy silence in the room. Then, the doorbell rang. It was 7:30 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door, checking the peephole. It was David. He was a day early. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same clothes he had on at my office. He had a thick shadow of stubble, and his eyes were bloodshot. He didn't look angry. He looked absolutely desperate. He saw my shadow under the door and knocked again, harder this time. Please, he called out, his voice muffled through the heavy wood. Please, just open the door. I need to talk to you. I didn't open it. I kept the deadbolt locked and leaned close to the door. You need to leave. Diane sent you a cease and desist. My accounts are frozen, he pleaded, pressing his hands against the door. Sarah's cards are declining. We can't even buy groceries. You have to call the bank. You have to tell them to lift the hold. I didn't put the hold on David. The police did. Because you called them, he shouted, his voice cracking. I'll pay it back. I have a plan to pay it back. I just need access to my checking account to pay the mortgage. Sarah is threatening to leave me if the house goes into foreclosure. He was standing on my porch, begging me to save him from the consequences of his own theft, so the woman he cheated with wouldn't leave him. I'm calling the police, I said clearly. No, wait, he panicked. I brought the check. The FedEx check from the flight camp. Sarah didn't cash it. She couldn't. It was in your name. I have it right here. I'll slide it under the door. Just call the bank and tell them it's settled. I looked down. A thin white FedEx envelope was shoved under the crack of the front door. That's evidence of mail fraud, David, I said. You just delivered it to my doorstep. I watched his shadow freeze under the crack of the door. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I heard the frantic scraping of his fingernails against the concrete porch. He was trying to push his fingers under the heavy weather stripping to claw the envelope back out. It was too far in. It was resting on my entryway rug, a stark white rectangle against the dark gray wool. Open the door, he yelled, his voice cracking into a high, panicked pitch. He started pounding on the wood with the flat of his hand. Give it back. I brought it to you to fix this. You can't use it against me. You just handed me the stolen funds, I said, keeping my voice dead level. And you crossed state lines to get them. Go home, David. You are a monster, he screamed. You are destroying my life over a summer camp. You destroyed it over a $25,000 loan in your son's name, I replied. The pounding stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the yelling. He hadn't known that I knew about the loan yet. His brother hadn't told him. I could hear his ragged breathing through the door. I looked through the peephole. He was backing away from the house, his hands gripping his own hair, his face twisted in absolute terror. He stumbled down the porch steps, almost tripping over the bottom brick, and practically ran to his car. He peeled out of the driveway so fast his tires squealed against the asphalt. I waited until his taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I stepped away from the door. I didn't touch the envelope. I went into the kitchen, grabbed a pair of metal salad tongs, keys and used them to pick up the FedEx package. I dropped it into a clear gallon-sized Ziploc bag and sealed it shut. I took a picture of it sitting on my kitchen counter and texted it to Detective Miller. He just brought this to my house. He shoved it under the door. Miller called me back in less than a minute. I could hear the dispatch radio in the background. Did you open it? He asked immediately. No. I picked it up with tongs and bagged it. Good. Don't touch it again. I'm sending a patrol car to pick it up right now. They'll log it into evidence tonight. I'll get a warrant to open it tomorrow morning. If the cashier's check is inside, we have physical possession of the stolen funds, and we have him voluntarily delivering the proceeds of his wife's wire fraud. He said his accounts are frozen. I said, they are. Miller confirmed. And after this stunt, I'm pulling his cell phone records. Do not answer the door if he comes back. Call 911 immediately. 10 minutes later, a patrol officer knocked on my door, took the Ziploc bag, gave me a receipt on a yellow carbon copy slip, and drove away. The physical evidence of my son's stolen summer was in the trunk of a police cruiser. I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, mentally preparing for the bureaucratic nightmare that Friday was going to bring. At 8 a.m., after dropping the kids at school, I sat at my dining room table and opened my laptop. I had a tall glass of water and the printed credit report sitting next to me. I took a deep breath and dialed the fraud department for Apex Financial. The automated system kept me on hold for 47 minutes. Smooth, cheerful jazz looped endlessly in my ear. When a representative finally answered, he sounded bored. Apex Financial, this is Greg. How can I help you? I am calling to report a fraudulent account opened using a stolen identity, I said. The social security number used belongs to my 14-year-old son. The boredom instantly vanished from Greg's voice, replaced by a rigid corporate script. I see. I'm going to need the account number, the social security number, and your name as the legal guardian. I gave him the information. I heard him typing. Ma'am, this account has a balance of $24,850. It was opened 3 months ago. Are you stating that the minor child did not authorize this line of credit? He's in 8th grade, Greg. He didn't authorize a $25,000 unsecured loan. His father stole his social security number, falsified his birth year on your online application, and drained the funds. I see, Greg said. We take allegations of family fraud very seriously. However, because the applicant successfully passed the identity verification screening at the time of opening, you will need to provide substantial documentation to prove this wasn't an authorized transaction or a misunderstanding between guardians. It's not a misunderstanding, I said, gripping the edge of the table. I have a police case number. There is an active criminal investigation into the father for grand theft and identity fraud. That's a good start, Greg said smoothly. We will need a notarized copy of the police report, specifically naming the account in question. We will also need an affidavit of forgery signed by the minor, your proof of guardianship, and a formal dispute letter. Once we receive all documents by certified mail, our internal investigation team will review the claim. This process typically takes 60 to 90 days. End quote. And in the meantime, I asked, are you going to keep charging a 28% interest rate on a fraudulent balance? Interest continues to accrue during the investigation, he said automatically. If the claim is verified as fraud, the balance and all associated interest will be cleared from the credit profile. And if your internal team decides not to verify it, then the account holder remains liable for the debt. I hung up the phone. I felt sick to my stomach. Apex Financial wasn't a victim here. They were a predatory machine. They had handed out $25,000 to a name and a number without ever checking if the person attached to it was old enough to drive a car. And now, they were going to put the burden of proof entirely on a 14-year-old boy. At 3:45 p.m., I drove to the schools to pick up Leo and Mia. This was the day David had demanded his 4 p.m. weekend visitation. The ex parte motion to suspend his custody still hadn't been signed by the judge. Legally, our custody agreement was still in effect. I parked in my driveway at exactly 3:55 p.m. We went inside. I locked the front door. I told Leo and Mia to go to their rooms and put headphones on. I sat on the living room sofa, my phone in my hand, watching the digital clock roll over. 4 p.m., 4:05 p.m., 4:15 p.m. The street outside was quiet. No familiar SUV pulled up to the curb. No angry text came through the co-parenting app. At 4:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. It wasn't David. It was Sarah's ex-husband. I got them, he said. The relief in his voice was so profound he sounded like he was crying. The judge signed the emergency order. I have full physical custody pending a full psychological and financial review of Sarah's household. The judge saw the police report regarding the identity theft investigation. He didn't even let her lawyer argue. Is she out of the house? I asked. She wasn't at the hearing, he said. Her lawyer said she couldn't afford the retainer anymore, so he dropped her this morning. She represented herself over a Zoom link from her living room. She looked, I don't know how to describe it. She looked empty. She just kept saying that she was the victim, that everyone was plotting against her. Where is David? He wasn't on the camera, he said. And according to my kids, he didn't come home last night. They said he packed a duffel bag at 2 a.m. and drove off. He had run. His accounts were frozen. His parents had disowned him. The police had the stolen check, and he was facing multiple felony charges. The moment the pressure became real, he abandoned the woman he blew up his family for, just like he had abandoned us. I thanked Sarah's ex, hung up, and leaned back against the sofa cushions. The house was so quiet. We were safe. He wasn't coming for the kids. He wasn't coming to yell at me. He was gone. But the mess he left behind was still sitting on my dining room table. I went upstairs to Leo's room. He had his headphones on, staring at his computer monitor, but he wasn't playing a game. He was just clicking his mouse, dragging a selection box over his desktop icons over and over again. I tapped his shoulder. He pulled the headphones down. Dad didn't show up, I said softly. I know, Leo said. He didn't look surprised. He just looked tired. The police have the check, I told him. The one from the flight camp. Dad brought it to the house last night and slid it under the door. The police took it for evidence. Leo finally turned his chair to look at me. So we have the money back? The police have it, I corrected gently. It has to stay in an evidence locker until the criminal case is resolved. It might be months or a year. He processed that. The money existed, but it was untouchable, so I still can't go. Not this summer, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I can't float another $2,400 right now, Leo. I have to hire Diane for a whole new set of hearings to deal with the loan he took out in your name. I'm so sorry. He nodded slowly. He looked past me, toward the trash bag in the corner of his room. It's okay, Mom, he said, but his voice was entirely devoid of emotion. I didn't really want to go anyway. It's just a stupid camp. He turned back to his computer and put his headphones back on. My heart broke right there in the doorway. He was doing what David had always done, minimizing the pain so he didn't have to deal with with the reality of the disappointment. He was building walls. Saturday morning broke gray and heavily overcast. I was in the kitchen, brewing coffee, trying to draft the affidavit of forgery for Apex Financial. I needed to figure out how to explain to a notary that my son needed to sign a legal document swearing his father was a thief. At 9:15 a.m., the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole, expecting a delivery driver. It was a man in a cheap gray suit. He was holding a thick manila envelope. He looked bored, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I unlocked the door and opened it a few inches, keeping the chain engaged. Yes? Delivery for Leo Davis, the man said, holding the envelope up. He's a minor, I said, a cold spike of adrenaline hitting my chest. I'm his mother. What is this? I just need to confirm he resides at this address, the man said, pulling a pen from his pocket. He lives here. I am his legal guardian. Give it to me. The man shrugged, slid the envelope through the crack in the door, and turned away without another word. He walked down the driveway and got into an unmarked sedan. I unchained the door, pulled the envelope inside, and tore it open. It wasn't from Apex Financial. It was a formal summons and complaint from the Civil Division of the county court. The plaintiff was a third-party debt collection agency called Midland Funding LLC. I scanned the thick stack of legal jargon, my eyes catching on the bolded names. Defendant, Leo Davis. They weren't just demanding the money. The $25,000 loan had gone into default because David's last scheduled minimum payment had bounced when his accounts were frozen by the police. Apex Financial hadn't waited. The moment the payment reversed, their automated system triggered a default clause, accelerated the full balance, and immediately sold the debt to a junk collection agency. And that agency had just sued my 14-year-old son in civil court. I stared at the thick stack of paper in my hands. The legal jargon blurred together, but the bold print at the top of the page, Times Midland Funding LLC versus Leo Davis Times, was perfectly clear. They were suing a child. I didn't panic this time. The sheer absurdity of it pushed me past fear and straight into a cold, clinical rage. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up my phone, and called Diane. It was Saturday morning, but I didn't care. She answered on the second ring. Tell me you aren't calling because he showed up again. No, I said. He didn't show up, but a process server just did. Midland Funding is suing Leo for the $25,000. They bought the debt from Apex. Diane let out a sound that was half laugh, half growl. They sued a 14-year-old? Yes. Oh, I am going to tear them apart, she said, her voice dropping into a register of pure professional joy. Midland is a junk debt buyer. They buy Excel spreadsheets of defaulted accounts for pennies on the dollar. They don't check IDs. They don't verify ages. They just run the names through an automated system and file bulk lawsuits, hoping people get scared and settle. Well, it is scary, Diane. He has a court date in 30 days. He's not going to court, she said firmly. I am going to fax Midland's corporate counsel a copy of Leo's birth certificate, the police report for identity theft, and a draft of a federal lawsuit against them for violating the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act by knowingly suing a minor. They will drop this suit with prejudice before Tuesday, and they will scrub his credit report clean just to keep me from dragging them in front of a judge. She was right. By Wednesday afternoon, I received a certified letter from Midland Funding's legal department. The lawsuit was dismissed. The debt was forgiven. They completely expunged the collection account from Leo's credit file. It was as if it never existed. The massive, terrifying weight of that $25,000 vanished in a matter of days. With the financial bleeding finally stopped, the criminal justice system took over. David didn't make it very far. He wasn't some criminal mastermind. He was just a cowardly middle management guy who had blown up his life. 2 weeks after he ran, Detective Miller called me. David had been pulled over by a highway patrol officer outside of Boise, Idaho. He was sleeping in his car in a Walmart parking lot. His registration was expired, and when the officer ran his plates, the felony warrants for wire fraud and identity theft popped up. He didn't fight. He just put his hands on the steering wheel and cried. They extradited him back to Washington. I didn't go to the arraignment. I didn't need to see him in an orange jumpsuit to feel vindicated. I just needed him away from my kids. The legal process was agonizingly slow, but the outcome was inevitable. The paper trail was too damning. The forged loan application from his IP address, the canceled check from the flight camp, the unauthorized transfers from the college funds. He had no defense. His public defender advised him to take a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial that would end in a much harsher sentence. He pled guilty to 2 counts of felony identity theft and 1 count of wire fraud. The judge sentenced him to 36 months in a state correctional facility, plus mandatory restitution. He lost his job. He lost his house. The bank foreclosed on it a month after he went to prison. Sarah's life dismantled just as completely. Without David's income, and with her own bank accounts heavily scrutinized, she couldn't afford to fight her ex-husband in family court. She lost physical custody of her children, granted only supervised visitations every other weekend. She moved into a cramped 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of town and took a job at a retail register just to make rent. The women from the community Facebook group, the ones who had initially rallied around her post about my financial coercion, dropped her the second the truth came out. Suburban moms don't stay friends with convicted fraudsters. It was a quiet, brutal, and entirely self-inflicted destruction. And slowly, our house started to breathe again. Without the constant shadow of David's missed weekends, passive-aggressive texts, and financial manipulation, Leo and Mia began to heal. Mia poured herself into her debate team. She stopped looking at the front door every time she won an award, expecting someone who would never show up. She knew who was there for her. Me, her grandfather, and her brother. That was her family. For Leo, the recovery took longer. The betrayal cut him the deepest. He had spent the rest of that spring quiet, keeping to his room, boxing up the aviation posters and airplane models he had spent years collecting. He didn't trust the world anymore, and I couldn't blame him. But I never stopped working on it. In late January, 9 months after the nightmare began, I received an envelope in the mail from the county prosecutor's office. The criminal case was fully closed. Enclosed was a cashier's check for $2,450. The police had finally released the stolen funds from the Flight Academy refund. I didn't deposit it into my checking account. I endorsed it and mailed it straight back to Pensacola, Florida. I didn't tell Leo. I spent 2 months coordinating with the admissions director, the same woman who had been duped by Sarah. When I explained the full scope of what had happened, she was so horrified that she personally bypassed the waitlist for the upcoming summer session. On a rainy Tuesday evening in March, exactly a year after this whole ordeal started, I ordered pizzas. We sat around the dining room table. Mia was arguing good-naturedly with Leo about what movie to watch. Leo was smiling. It was a small, guarded smile, but it was there. When we finished eating, I stood up and walked over to my work bag. I pulled out a heavy, glossy glossy white folder. The Pensacola Flight Academy crest was embossed on the front in gold foil. I walked back to the table and set it down right in front of Leo. He stopped talking. He looked at the folder, then up at me. The guarded look was back instantly. Mom, what is this? Open it. He hesitated. His hands hovered over the thick cardstock. He slowly flipped it open. Inside was the welcome packet, a daily schedule, and a personalized letter from the Academy's head instructor, welcoming Leo Davis to the July session. The police released the check, I said quietly, sitting down next to him. The money was yours. It was always yours. And they saved your spot. Leo picked up the welcome letter. His hands were shaking, just slightly. He read the first paragraph, and I watched the tension in his jaw finally break. The cold, remote mask he had been wearing for a year just dissolved. He looked at me, and his eyes were completely bright with tears. He didn't try to hide them this time. Really? He whispered. Really? I said. You're going to Florida. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, and threw his arms around my neck. He held on to me so tightly I could barely breathe. He was almost as tall as me now, a young man who had been through the fire and come out the other side. Mia got up and hugged him from the side, resting her head against his shoulder. I closed my eyes and held them both. The house was warm, the mortgage was paid, the college accounts were secure. We had survived the worst thing David could throw at us, and he had only managed to break himself. I looked over Leo's shoulder at the glossy brochure sitting on the table. The picture of the runway was bright and clear, stretching out toward an open sky. We were finally free.